And we are live. What is up, YouTube? How you guys doing out there? It is your boy, Project Nerd HQ, Hector, chiming in with my guy Nick from
Hey,
across the seas. How you doing, Nick?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, bro. I'm good, bro. Just here on this beautiful Saturday. Your Sunday. You're in the future.
Easter Sunday. Happy Easter.
Yes, happy Easter to you as well, and happy Easter to people out there in the chat. Oh man, it's been a hectic couple of weeks. Alex can't join us today because he has to study for his test. So salute, Alex. Wish you well.
Good luck.
You know,
Good luck,
med school
Alex.
is really kicking his butt, but I know he will pull through. I have all faith in him.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's a tough gig, but it is a very necessary one for our society.
Hmm.
So good work, Alex, and good luck. We are thinking of you today, and
Definitely,
no doubt the two of us can talk enough to cover for Alex.
definitely,
Um,
definitely, definitely. But yeah. So let's get into this because you and I was just literally discussing it. But MLB deciding to pull their All Star game from the state of Georgia because of the voting rules and the voting
voting
restrictions.
rules is a generous way to describe it.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
You know, look, in Australia we have compulsory voting, right?
Mhm,
And we have a something called the Australian Electoral Commission, which is completely independent of both parties.
mhm,
And once you turn 18, you are automatically registered. So, for example, if you get your driver's license or something like that, that is also going to register you to vote. And then if you don't vote, you get a fine.
mhm,
And the way it works is every local primary school and high school becomes a voting booth. And, usually, with very few exceptions, it's within walking distance from your house. And then at the end, there's typically some kind of a sausage sizzle to raise money for, a local issue.
Yep.
It's $1, maybe $2 if you get a drink, a can of soda with it, and they call it a democracy sausage. And we have some people who will give you like how to vote cards and things like that. But it's a pretty simple system, and you maybe queue for no more than 20 minutes, and all round it might take you 40 minutes, and you're done. And every single member of the Australian public in a federal election is required to vote, and we have usually above 96% turnout. So when I hear these things from your land, it doesn't make sense to me. So
It's frustrating because it's like throughout the entire United States, the way the system is set up is rigged. That way,
mm,
those at the bottom, those with the tiniest voice can't speak out. So one issue that I've been having, especially on Twitter today, you know how Twitter gets a little bit hectic, but going back and forth with like conservatives that are like, oh yeah, but like look in New York and look at California. It's like, yeah, we have to change that as well. New York City has one of the most backwards, voting registrations of them all. If we had a universal idea, like you pointed out, once you turn 18, you're automatically registered. Just like here in the United States, when it comes to like the draft, once you turn 18, you're automatically registered for the draft. So it's kind of why can't we have both? You can't say we can't do it, but at the same time we do it in other aspects.
well, and even still, the problem with any democracy is always solved with more democracy.
Hmm.
So, why not lower it to 16?
Hmm.
Um, and I think,
Hmm.
in particular, the whole thing with Georgia comes down to like Warnock and Ossoff, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that they want like, Purdue and Loeffler were really vile candidates.
Hmm.
Wasn't Purdue done for insider trading at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, or was that Loeffler? And she's married to like the guy who owns the New York Stock Exchange and worth like $500 billion or something. It's like, the system of New York is set up. The system of New York, the system of the U.S. politics is set up to protect the minority from the rule of the majority, but it's the opulent minority that is protected.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you think about the Senate, and you think about what the Senate is all about. These were only until recently positions appointed by governors, and governors are not voted in by the majority of people themselves. So it's sad given how how traumatic last year's national election was, not just for Americans, but I can tell you for people all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and 5 years, 4 years under Donald Trump, um, people talk about how, oh, I miss how funny he is or whatever, but the terrifying thing was that he was never joking. And
Mm-hmm.
everything he said, as foolish as it always sounded, had some kind of harsh reality to it in terms of like a loyalty to his narcissism. And every morning waking up and having no ability to participate in this democracy, but feeling all the effects of it all the time. Um, I can remember in 2017, like the beginning of 2017, having a conversation with a very close friend of mine, and his initial reaction was, "I don't care, it's not my president." But he was
Yeah.
telling me that feeling lasted all of about 24 hours before he realized, well, if this guy starts another world war, we're all involved, you know. And so, and then it gets down to like, what does partisanism mean in the context of US politics? And it's like, you know, barracking for a team rather than participating in a democracy.
It's
And
more tribalism than anything. What's interesting about this is it's, let's be honest, like mainstream Democrats and like Republicans too, but mainstream Democrats are like hypocrites because it's like you guys froze Bernie Sanders out. Like you guys use the same BS tactics that you're complaining about in Georgia, and you guys are using those same tactics other places in order to freeze Bernie out. Like if you're going to have that, and I always keep the same energy, let this be what opens up Pandora's box, and we all have like a universal shift and a universal rule change when it comes to voting, so that doesn't happen.
yeah, I, the whole thing with Bernie Sanders, though, is that the precarity of both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as they're currently constituted is dependent on certain things. And Bernie Sanders, just as Jeremy Corbyn in the UK context, or Bill Shorten, less so Bill Shorten in the Australian context of 2017 or 2018, or to may have even been 2019. It's all a blur because of COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's hard to remember when one year began and end now because it's all the pre-COVID time. But I think it was actually 2019 that we had our last federal election, and um, there were certain things that Bill Shorten was doing that was really exciting and really good. And of course, it wasn't what Rupert Murdoch wanted, and that kind of plays itself out, in the sense of we have Scott Morrison as the prime minister now, and Scott Morrison doesn't have the same charisma as Trump, but he has the same politics, and it's scary. It's
Mm-hmm.
frightening, and you see that with Boris Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we can get back to Georgia in a minute, but there's a certain delicious irony in the British citizens being deported from Mallorca in Spain and other places in Spain because of Brexit and
Mm-hmm.
being locked out of the European Union, and they've
Yeah.
all moved there to retire there and spend spend their days on the beach rather than dreary island of the UK. But these are all consequences of this false, or not even false, populism that the
Mm-hmm.
world experienced through the back end of the recovery of the Great Recession.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it always,
I'm sorry, when you highlight that Brexit issue, it's kind of funny because just like you said, because like it's with Trump and his tariffs, his whole trade war
yeah.
with China. It actually hurt American industry. It actually
Oh,
did. They
yeah.
started rate, especially the farming industry. Like it was
Yeah,
ridiculous.
but then here's the thing, Hector. It hurt the Australian industry. Like the Australian wine industry is on its knees because of those policies.
Hmm.
And Trump never cared. He doesn't care if the Australian wine industry falls over. What does it matter to him? It's America first, not America and
Hmm.
Australia first. So, within that perspective, it's like you have to know once you start a war, even if it is just a trade war, and a trade war is the first step to an actual war. It always has been historically, with obvious exceptions here and there. But typically a trade war can easily lead to a hot war, and you got to know that once a war starts, all bets are off the table, right? All bets. You don't know how it's going to end. So the key is to avoid starting a war at all costs, always.
Hmm.
And whether it's Cuomo starting a war with the elite of New York, or whether it's Georgian Republicans starting a war with democracy, um, the whole thing with the suite of voter suppression. It's not just obviously Georgia. It's not just Atlanta. It's more broadly across several, I guess, states in the South, but Wisconsin, etc., as well. Um, we don't know that their standover tactics are going to work in their favor. I mean, like, there's every chance they will, and
Hmm.
then we're going to be back in 2022 with a kind of similar situation that we were in earlier, and the tenuous majority in the Senate that the Democrats have will be eroded. And this is why, a couple of weeks ago when we were last on, um, you know, S1 becomes so important
Hmm.
because it's passed the House as HR1. It is a huge Voting Rights Act bill. It will dramatically improve uh, the ability to vote,
Hmm.
and the Democrats have it within their power now. Granted, you have those rogue senators like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. But I always think, and look, this is the hard way to do it, right? But I always think if it's a 50-50, and you've got this Senate Republican cohort who is really malicious and just interested in, like, not even authoritarian power, but just the power of not doing anything.
Hmm.
And under Mitch McConnell for God knows how many years. I mean, what it was it 2010 to 2020 that Mitch McConnell basically had control of the Senate. And
Yeah.
what happened? What was passed? What was facilitated? Where's the governance to make America a better place? To make the lives of Americans better? It wasn't there. It was
No.
all around this kind of tax cuts for the
Hmm.
rich and whatever else is, like, in the
Not just
interest
that,
of.
but when you bring it back to when he actually gained power, when Obama was in charge
Mhm.
and the Senate flipped, all he did was blockade, roadblocks, everything.
That's yeah.
He stopped every judge and every appointment, anything, and down to the Supreme Court, the lower levels. That's why when Trump went into office, they
Hundreds of judges.
on the
Yeah.
200s version, like 250 different right wing judges that all come from the I forgot what institute, not the Cato Institute, some conservative judge, some
Yeah, I
clubhouse
think
for
it's the
judges that are
Federalist
conservative.
Society.
I forgot.
I
Oh,
think
what
it's the
happened?
Federalist Society.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Federalist Society. Yeah,
yeah.
thank you, Nick, the smartest
And I
person in the
mean,
room.
look, though, maybe we'll see. Um, I these are props, right? These aren't real books. um, but the whole thing with the Federalist Society is that they're very much like Koch brothers, dark money kind of zone, if you will. And that gets back to, your Citizens United and all those things that have
Mm-hmm.
happened in that period. So there's a definite like disregard for human life within the conservative rule of the Senate, and this drive towards theocracy. Because I don't know what else would you call it, right? It is a drive towards theocracy. That's
Yeah.
what they're looking for. They're looking
Literally,
for that
Tucker
kind of.
Carlson had someone on his show literally 2-3 days ago, and they literally said that the conservatives are going to pick a fascist within the next 10 to 20 years.
Well, I mean, that's wrong, right? In its analysis, because they picked one in 2016.
No, but
So
like, yeah, but like someone who's just upfront fascist. Like Trump tried to hide it with like his whole like,
did
oh,
he?
America first, and
Did
like
he though? I
the,
mean,
this
what
person
is
will
a
be like, yes, I'm a
fascist?
fascist. Like
Right, but like, I mean,
Trump was horrible. We both could agree that nobody wants a better Trump, or no one's
well,
trying to push for a better
I
Trump.
guess I'm just questioning like the timeline of like in the next 20 years as if it's some far off distant thing. We're there now, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
was Trump. And had Trump won the 2020 election, which he all but nearly did, or had the insurrection gone his way, which again it all but nearly did, I think that the whole thing of like the question of whether Trump was or wasn't a fascist was settled already, and he still fits that mold. And it's the Groypers and the Nick Fuentes crowd that terrify me most, because that's where it is, and that's a theocratic version of fascism.
Mm-hmm.
It's and look, I guess like when I think about that, there's, and let me just check because I got to get the name right on this because I'm terrible with names. So and it's a new book and I haven't read it yet, but there's a new writer, or a new book out by a writer named Albina Asmanova, and it's called Capitalism on Edge: How Fighting Precarity Can Achieve Radical Change Without Crisis or Utopia. And I think this work is important. And again, I haven't read it yet, but I think this work is important because this shows us that it's not simply inequality that's the problem. We have always had inequality. We will always have inequality.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the average, like you take a Gini coefficient or something like that, yeah, you can do a lot to reduce the gap between the richest and the poorest. But in any society at any point in history, the most egalitarian society is still going to have quite a considerable distance between the poorest member of that society and the richest member of that society. And even if you just think of like any other area where you need a little bit of inequality, like, imagine watching basketball if every single player was just factory made the exact same. They could run it, they could sprint at the same speed, they could fatigue at the same rate, they could do injuries at the same rate. It would be boring. Eventually, it
Mm-hmm.
would be boring. You need that inequality to see what the strategies are. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you deal with all LeBron? And what's the strategy to defeating, the Cavs or whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, or the Mavericks, which was very upsetting. But anyway,
Oh God, yeah.
so um, there's still a few games left in the season, and
Oh yeah, we
I
have a
think,
game. We have a game tonight versus Detroit, which is like the bottom feeders of the league. So yeah. Well, the Knicks right now we're like limping. We have the first aid sign on our back. Like we have a bunch of players that are hurt, so we just got to get healthy.
well, yeah, but that's always the challenge with any season, right? Injury.
Yeah, if we had universal
Unfortunate
health care, it'd be different.
for the supporters. I think the NBA do have something akin to universal healthcare. To be honest, I mean, like
Well, did you?
the
Well, there was
players,
during early in the
they're
season.
considered assets, right? So they need to be
But check,
given the proper
check
care.
this out. Earlier in the season, there was a big trade that sent James Harden right from the Houston Rockets to the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets sent the player to the Indiana Pacers, a young player. That player, when he got traded, had to do like a full physical. They found a cancerous cyst attached to his ribs or someplace like that, or his spine, something. And because of that trade and because of that physical, they found it. Crazy.
I don't know what to tell you, man. Move to Australia.
Man,
Start
can't.
watching AFL.
I'll move to Canada. I'll still chime in and listen. You know, watch MOB and the Knicks. I can never give up my passion for the Knicks, but
I know. It's hard. Well, look. Jokes aside, you can't move to Australia, and if everyone who felt that way about universal healthcare moved to Canada or Australia or England or whatever, then it would just accelerate the issues within the United States. Like, you have to stay and fight, and that's what it's about. And the issues with the egregiousness of these power grabs in states like Georgia is, yes, it's terrifying, but it also reveals a certain level of desperation
yeah.
on behalf of these parties who feel that the only way that they can get across the line is to sort of be super aggressive, and in the aggressiveness reveal what their intentions are unambiguously. You know, I think there was an argument 30 years ago that it wasn't necessarily voter suppression, right? If you go back to like 1991 or whatever, under the end of the Reagan years into the H.W. Bush years into the Clinton years, I don't think the words voter suppression were in the vocabulary. I mean, it was happening, right? And we look back and we see how far we've come, and we say, yes, there was definitely sexism going on. There was definitely racism going on. These things were much worse then than they are today, perhaps. But the vocabulary around voter suppression and voter suppression laws wasn't there, and it is there now. And that in itself is a good development forward. But it's still like, you know, knowing how far still you have to go, regardless of how far you've come, can be really difficult. And you know, my heart goes out to those people. But I also I take a lot of solace out of the fact that whether it's Stacey Abrams or somebody else stepping up and filling that role, that, you know, the passion that's required, but the passion that's there. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but it's incumbent upon the Biden administration to push for SR1. We know it can happen. We know, and that's what I was going to say. There's got to be at least one. You know, I forget his name, but there was that James who the guy who basically quit the Republican Party when the Mueller report came out. Do you remember that guy?
You talking about Justin Amash?
Justin Amash. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. He's an independent now. Yeah.
Right. So I think he's in the House. But we got to find the Justin Amashas in the Republican Senate. Like, you only need two. You only need two, and then it doesn't matter what Cinema and Manchin do. If you find those two that want to leave that kind of death cult caucus, and look, it's going to be hard. It's probably not Susan Collins or Jody Ertz or whoever.
No,
You know, it is going to be really hard to find them because these people
it's not
have
your
no
Ted
soul.
Cruz.
You know, it's definitely not Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, little Marco. I mean, that would just be that if you were able to get little Marco to do it, then you're just opening the door for Ivanka to come in Florida, right?
No, yeah,
So,
literally, and he's scared of that. But it goes to like, even if that was to happen, which is a reality that I would love to live in, we still have the filibuster. We have to get rid of that filibuster because with the filibuster still in line, you still need 65 votes to pass anything.
60, but
60?
I mean,
Oh, I thought it was 65.
60, yeah. You
60,
need
okay.
10. And look, I mean, politics makes strange bedfellows, and that's incumbent upon you to have all 50 of the Democrats voting one way plus 10 of the Republicans joining you. It
Hmm.
makes it really difficult. But we know that the filibuster can be removed in a single up-down vote, and it will
Yeah.
probably go 50-50. And
Hmm.
and then you have Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the
Breaking that
president of the
tie.
Senate, come in and break the tie. So I think, at some point, the whole desire for bipartisanism, like the Republicans don't want that. The Republicans aren't out there saying, oh, you can't pass this bill because it's not going to get any Democratic Senate votes or Democratic House votes. So, we need to be bipartisan. But for some reason, when it comes to the other side of the arena, they're very, very interested and excited by the idea of achieving bipartisanism.
Hmm.
And that, uh, I like it, the pinko commies. Um, that is the issue, and it's frustrating from an outsider's perspective to know that the the reality is that you're never going to get that bipartisanship that
Yeah.
they're seeking. Like Newt Gingrich killed that in 1992 or 94 or whenever it was. That's been dead a long time. Um, but w- I just I
It's.
wonder about it because what's like the legacy that Biden wants to leave, right? He's come in.
Hmm.
His whole thing was like Charlottesville. His
Yeah.
whole thing was like, if it wasn't for Charlottesville, I wouldn't have run for president.
Bringing
And
back the
my
soul of the nation, Jack.
Yeah, but also decency, like making the role of president decent again. Like, what would that be? MPDA, right? Which is pretty close to like what was he known? The senator from Delaware was the credit card senator from MBDA or something,
Hmm.
the credit card company he worked for. And like we see that with the whole thing with student debt and the kind of limits of what Chuck Schumer is actually willing to do in New York as the senator, um, and say, oh, well, let's all do a letter writing campaign to Joe Biden and share our heartbreaking stories of, you know, this this system and what this system is doing to people. It's all about structure and agency. And the Republicans want to establish oppressive structure to restrict agency, especially around the bodies of non-white men. So you look at the situation with like abortion, which is just deplorable. As a sociologist, there's one answer because we know that the abortion rate does not change,
Hmm.
regardless of what you do legally. The
Yeah.
abortion rate does not change.
Whatsoever.
What changes is the safety of those abortions,
Hmm.
right? And so, to talk about some book which doesn't even mention it, and if it does hint at it, if you do read it interpretively,
Hmm.
it is more in favor of women's rights than anything else.
Yeah, and
Or to
actually,
talk about,
in the Bible, when when you look up I think it's Numbers 13 or Numbers 11, it talks about like literally like if your white cheats on you and you suspect the child being of your neighbor, give her some like water, and if the baby's not born, then that means she cheated on you. So that's abortion right there.
yeah. So that's what but there's other hints throughout it,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
but secondly, to then be like, in deference to say Pope John Paul II, who, historically we've seen, Sinead O'Connor tried to tell us at the time, but, the Catholic Church wanted to, immortalize John Paul II as a saint because he restored the name of the Catholic Church, and kind of gave them a little bit of credibility after they collaborated with the Nazis in World War II.
Hmm.
Blah 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 blah. So you have the watershed, and no longer is mass read in Latin, but it's read in the native language, and we're democratizing the church, even though we're not, and blah blah blah. But then it comes out that actually he was fully aware of all the child sexual molestation issues that were going on, and he was a participant in moving people around to protect the name of the church, and so he comes out and says no to condoms, and AIDS is pray the AIDS away, or whatever the campaign was. And Reagan is, for different reasons, equally giving bullshit advice about it because it's not something that affects his constituents.
Yeah.
Although, I don't know about Roger Stone. Maybe it does affect his constituents. I'm not saying anything. Right?
No,
I'm
mum's
just
the
saying I
word.
don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. So, um, and
It's like a pizza parlor not having a basement, but they still believe kids are being sold down there. It's crazy.
well, I don't know I don't know if that matches. I was implying that Roger Stone might fit the constituency that would be a little bit worried about AIDS, but I don't know. I don't know which way. And I'm not really going to speculate on the sexuality of Roger Stone. But the point that I'm trying to make is that you have this deference to a leader outside the US while you're chanting America first. And it doesn't make any sense unless you put it into a context of precarity politics. And you say what these people are seeking is certainty. And if they can't get certainty in the material world, then they want certainty in the non material world.
Yes.
And they want structure that enforces that certainty because they want to know that society upholds these values, which are very strict, very stringent, and then that way they don't have to be as self-disciplined because the system is going to discipline them. And who knows, we let this play out for 20 years and all of a sudden indulgences are back. Oh, you killed a child, pay $50 to the church. You did this, you did that, you slept with another man's wife, whatever, well, you replace his property, and we go back to that whole thing of like, get rid of no fault divorces, because no fault divorces are the reason we have an issue in our society. It's not that men are beating women. It's not that men are sexually assaulting women. It's that women are complaining they're being beaten. It's that women are complaining they're being sexually assaulted. And it's a backwards logic for
It's
sure.
blaming the victim for what's going on with them. It's blaming poor people for being poor. It's blaming immigrants for trying to migrate to the United States. It's instead of focusing on the root issue of it all, instead of highlighting what the root issue and actually getting to the core and actually solving the problem. No, you just want to just blame people and tell them to put themselves up by their bootstraps.
Yeah, but there's like 3 or 4 categories of people in the United States: Native Americans, immigrants, refugees. That covers 99% of people in America.
And if you like get down to it, when you have like first generation immigrants, that it's like basically like what I'm going to say is like, look at me for instance, right? I was born here. I didn't do shit to be American. Like I was just born here. I just fucking crawled out my mother's vagina in the Bronx from a hospital, and I
Well,
was born here.
I mean,
You
you
know,
didn't
like
crawl, you slid.
yeah, I slid. I just
Slip, slip
down
and slide,
down
right?
slip and slide. But it's like that's all I did to fucking be here. You know, like when you have people that actually assimilate, that actually leave the culture that they was raised in, come here at 18, 19, 20 years old, do the work that they need to do in order to like get along with all these racist idiots here that screaming at them to go back to where they came from when they didn't do shit to begin with to even be here in the first place.
Look, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. In my city, Melbourne, we are a genuine multicultural city. A little bit like Montreal, a little bit like Toronto. And there's something to be said for that, but it's not perfect, and we still have those issues here where there are model migrants. Now it's different geographically in terms of who we attract, but something to keep in mind is that wealthy nations like Australia, like Canada, like New Zealand, like the UK, like America, where they have a system of the ability, at least in theory, to achieve the great country dream, the great American dream, the great Australian dream, which is your white picket fence, your backyard, your barbecue, and your full-time job with, your two cars and your 2.5 kids.
Mhm.
So the issue is that you have something called the replacement rate demographically, which is 2.1. And all of these countries, and not just those that I listed, but other European nations that are quite developed as well, have dropped below 2.1 replacement rate, which
Yeah.
actually means that your population is contracting. And because of COVID, Australia's population contracted for the first time in a long time, right? Because the international borders were shut for a year. So we have a full year of like what would happen if nobody came to Australia, if Australia was no longer a destination people wanted to emigrate to. And what we saw is that our population would contract. And once it starts contracting, there's not a lot you can do, right? You could take the Romanian approach of Nicolae Ceausescu and force women to be pregnant for 9 months of every year, but it's not going to work out well. And so we supplement our contracting population with immigrants, and we rely on immigration. So
Mhm.
whilst there's a big show and dance about boat people and illegal immigrants and illegal migration, and these people just want to come here to get on welfare, and meanwhile you look at what welfare is actually offering people, and it's like a third of what below poverty wages would be if
Mhm.
they didn't have it. It's
Mhm.
nothing.
Like the
It's nothing.
conversation with welfare, it gets me upset as to, like, you was here when we had the conversation last time, but it's like the max anyone could probably get is 800, $900 a month. And if you expand that for the whole year, no one's
Yeah, but
trying to
what's
live
what's
for under
rent?
10.
What's
No, no, no,
rent
no,
in
no,
New
no, no, no,
York?
absolutely. No, 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 absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Like, even if somebody
Mm.
was taking advantage and having so many kids that they got the max of 800, 900, that's not even 11,000 a year. Nobody could survive off of that at all. You have like 50% or over 50% of people who are working on welfare or minimum wage workers. Then you throw in 30% who are senior citizens. Then you have like maybe a small minute of people that some people feel like, well, they don't deserve it. What do you mean they don't deserve it? We all deserve it. Everyone is
Well,
contributing
so
to this melting
so
pot that we live
here's
in.
exactly, but here's something. Here's something. Like that's a focus on the individual, right? And I think
Mhm.
Reagan was very astute and very smart, and his strategy was incredibly successful. With whether it was, was it Reagan or Bush who had the Willie Horton ad? I think it might have been Bush against
Yeah, I think it was
Dukakis.
Bush. Hold on.
But that was an extension of Reagan's welfare queen idea anyway. And the idea of this welfare queen, this person who was using, false social security numbers and, collecting multiple checks, that actually made some sense, but it was fraud, right?
Mhm.
And you have X percent, like with the COVID relief that even what Trump was able to put through in 2020, the first rescue bill, the $600 check bill. You had a huge issue with that because the organized crime syndicates were quick to get on it and exploit it and game the system to their advantage. So you had states who can't print their own money losing hundreds of millions, if not billions, like New York, it would have been in the billions to organized crime. Well, okay, that's going to happen anyway. You've got RICO laws, go after them. That's not the issue. But the issue is it's a narrative focused on the individual and the moral worth of the individual rather than looking at the structures and the agency those structures provide. So if you take a different view, and you say that welfare as a structure actually enables Walmart as an institution to underpay their staff, then we see, well, who's actually the beneficiary of welfare? It's Walmart, it's
Mhm.
Amazon, it's Starbucks, it's these
Mhm.
major corporations that don't pay tax and underpay their staff, such to the point that their staff are eligible for SNAP or food stamps or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And so when you look at it when you zoom out and actually look at the misery and the pockets of pain that are produced by the system as it stands and the very limited pathways out of that individuals actually have, other than hoping to get incredibly talented at sport or music or become an inventor or hustle and maybe make it lucky with some what was that guy? Who was that guy? Do you remember he was all over YouTube about 6 years ago? Was it Tony Lopez or something? And he'd be like, "Here's my Lamborghini, and I read a book a day,
Oh
and
yeah,
I
yeah. I
take out
can't.
50
Yeah, yeah,
credit
yeah. The self
cards, and
help douchebag. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
all
They're
that
they're all
shit."
scams.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure for one or two people it worked out, right? You know,
Mm,
for a very small percentage of the population that was sucked into that, there was some success stories. There always has to be, right?
hmm.
Otherwise, how do you promote the system?
Yeah.
Um, and it's the same. Like the military is another example of this, where the military is able to socialize certain things like healthcare. You know, if you think about food distribution within the military, and if you were to apply that to the civilian society, what would that look like? What would it look like to have a national food service that meant that food was fully decommodified, that farmers were introduced into more local areas where you could have more opportunity for community gardens to grow food, backyard gardens, what we used to call Liberty Gardens.
Hmm.
You know, imagine if instead of having, you know, these, I forget what they're called, but they're like the outside of buildings, the fascia on the outside of a building. And they're basically just oil derivatives, this material, which means that, like in Melbourne, for example, we've had this issue where if a fire starts in an apartment and it gets to the fascia, the outside of the building, the bit that covers it to make it look pretty,
Hmm.
it'll just bang go up because it's oil. It's a
Hmm.
product derived and made from oil. So what would happen? And I know, like from a flammable point of view, it's probably not much different. But what would happen if instead of that you had a vertical garden? Right? And the sides of buildings were vertical gardens. And then you
Hmm.
had, you know, your window cleaners going up and down cleaning the windows, but then you had your gardeners going up and down and collecting and harvesting from that. I mean, look at what happened in Cuba. How did they become a successful to the extent that they are successful? But given the sanctions that were put on them, there was every reason for Cuba to devolve into a failed state, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
they
all.
didn't. And they
No.
didn't because they promoted local autonomy through
Mhm,
rooftop gardens, community gardens, you know, and many other things. I'm not an expert on Cuban history, but I
mhm.
know that little factoid. And you
Yeah,
know
not
what?
having to depend on like the international food market when it came to like importing certain veggies or certain foods. They decided, no, we're gonna
Yeah.
start growing them here.
So it's really when we think of the big macro picture. And what is it that we want these systems and structures and institutions to provide for the society? And what kind of agency do we want? Everyone's screaming, "I want freedom, give me liberty or give me death." And their vision of liberty is this idea of, okay, I go out into the world and I have to go and work for someone, and I'm oppressed from 6 till 6, right?
Hmm.
6 a.m. till 6 p.m. I live entirely under the structures and rules of somebody else's design. I have to adhere to policies that some faceless bureaucrat has written in an office that I'll never see, with no participation or consultation of me or the other people who work on the shop floor,
Hmm.
right? And it's all best practice imported from whichever guru has come in and you know, the executive getaway on the Hawaiian golf course and in the boardroom of the Hilton Hotel, whichever, you know, business mindfulness guru has come in and sold them whatever package it is, leading teams or whatever. You know, and then they write up the suite of policies, and your shop floor dude on minimum wage, or maybe he's got a union job and he's on a decent wage, but either way, from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. on the road, he has to follow the road rules, or she has to follow the road rules, or they have to follow the road rules. They get to work, they have to follow the work rules and work policies. Um, you know, within the consumer side of it, there are certain rules that you have to follow as well. So it's all this rules, and then I get home and I get to be the king of my castle,
Yeah.
and I get to be the owner of my wife and children, and I get to be the tyrant within the four walls of my home and backyard. And that's what I consider to be freedom. right? Freedom for me to be the oppressor when I'm home, because I have to take the shit of the oppressors when I'm not at home. And it's like, okay, fine. That's one vision of freedom. It's very, very limited though. What if
Mm-hmm.
we re-envisage freedom? What if we decommodified food and housing? The issue with decommodifying housing, of course, is that, these economies, whether it's the US economy or the Australian economy, as we saw in 2008, is heavily dependent on property prices perpetually going up. And we know that they don't. It's subject to the same forces of supply and demand as anything else.
It's a
And
fallacy.
eventually, yeah, but eventually the Saudi oil money is going to run out. Eventually, the Chinese economy is going to fail to consistently hit 8% growth a year, right? People don't understand when they're saying, oh, like, well, China was successful throughout COVID because they didn't go into recession and they still had a 1% GDP growth. You have to factor that against the fact that they've had average 8% GDP growth for years, right? Decades even. And so you've got, a 7% differential there. That's a recession. You show me any other nation in the world that can sustain a 7% drop in GDP in a 12-month period, and it's not called a recession.
Yeah.
So eventually the money runs out, and eventually those luxury apartment buildings end up sitting empty while homeless bodies pile up at train stations and in doorways throughout the rest of the system. So a risk has to be taken, and it's just who has to suffer the risk profile. Is it the defenseless minority who can't stand up for themselves against these big systems, or is it the system imposing doctrines of fairness upon those at the top? And that's
Well,
why Bernie Sanders wasn't given the opportunity to become president.
yeah, because he threatened the establishment on both sides of the aisle,
That's
and the
right.
elites on both sides of the aisle. Like the Republicans, they at first they didn't want Trump, but then they wind up saying like, all right, well, let's see what happens. They got on the roller coaster, and that's
You
literally what
know,
it was, a roller coaster.
no, but it's the same as Bolsonaro in Brazil, right?
Yeah,
They want the policies. They just don't want the clown show.
yeah.
And that's where the liability comes, because then they can't pretend like what they're doing is legitimate. It's a legitimation crisis within that sector of the elite.
Because
And
look what happens when you have right wing ideology. The extremist right wing ideology leads you where? To the Nazis. And then you have like left wing ideology. The extremist left wing ideology leads you to what? Healthcare, education programs, land reforms.
well, I mean, what does that look like though? The Black Panthers?
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, but just because we have to compare apples to apples, I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
think
Trying to do
the
that, yeah.
extreme left is Stalingrad. I don't think the extreme left in 2021 is a Trotskyite revolution. I don't have a revolution, but what I think is like there's a lot of purity politics that goes on, right? When we talk about like equality, and as one white guy and one very, very close to white guy, it's not really our position to be talking about like women's rights and advocating
Yeah.
in the sense that it affects us, but we have a responsibility nonetheless to say that we are a long way from equality,
Mm-hmm.
right? But between men and women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I say women, I mean women who are born women and women who identify as women
Mm-hmm.
in whatever capacity that
Mm-hmm.
is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, Judith
100%.
Butler, Ray Connell, and many, many other theorists in gender studies have shown us how open gender actually is and how fluid gender actually is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that tomorrow I'm going to wake up and be like, oh, I'm Nikki, I'm no longer Nick, right? And
Yeah.
add a Y to the end of my name and wear a dress.
Yeah.
I don't have the confidence to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I would. But start small. Maybe I'll paint my nails or something, or wear a little bit of lipstick and some high heels instead of flats. But the all those things, right? Gender is a construct. It's
Mm-hmm.
unambiguous. It's just a fact of life, and the people
Yeah.
who fail to see that fall into a very specific gender role, which we might call hegemonic masculinity. which is like a fantasy invented in the 50s, like through things like Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows
Mhm.
Best, I Love Lucy, to create this idea of like the utopia of the suburban nuclear family
Mhm.
that lives in isolation from other members of the family. And you know, you can fast forward to Everyone Loves Raymond and see what that isolation does to people, right? Even in
Yeah.
the comedic expression of it. Um, so it's this thing of like the suburbs are the dream, when in reality the suburbs are no, you know, different, of course, than the incarceral system, but similar to the incarceral system in the sense that it's just warehousing people,
Yeah.
and it's not a community, and
Mhm.
you can easily slip into this sense that there is no society, there are only individuals, as that Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher once proclaimed. And so you end up with this scenario where people feel that they're maladapted because they're not enjoying the life in the suburbs away from other human interaction, commuting in a car that's polluting the environment, that they know
Mhm.
is polluting the environment, that they even feel a tinge of guilt about, but they can't afford a Tesla. And even if they could afford a Tesla, they got, you know, Danny at work telling them, well, did you know that the Tesla batteries are actually just as bad for the environment as diesel powered and gasoline powered vehicles, blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, Danny, that might be true. The problem isn't the Tesla batteries. The problem is Elon Musk.
Yes.
Um, so that's not the issue here. And the problem is this whole thing of like, well, if we replace every vehicle one to one with an electric vehicle, then we avert climate change. Or as a colleague of mine shared with me over the past fortnight, like, well, we don't even have to worry about climate catastrophe anymore. It's been averted. Bill Gates is going to blow up some chalk dust in the atmosphere, and that'll cool the planet, and we're fine. It's all good. We can keep buying our
The
Ford
solution has been found.
F-150 trucks, right? And drive across 2 lanes of the highway because the axle base is so wide at the back, and we can pollute the atmosphere. And why not reverse some EPA laws? Why not bring back some littering? Let's
Yeah.
trash the highways as well while we're at it, and
Fuck
let's
it.
bring back polystyrene coffee cups and packaging while we're at it. I mean, like, come on, it's not going to work that way. We are in a lot of trouble. You know, if we don't do something to avert these crises that are building up, we could face a scenario where not only is the environmental pollution shrinking men's penises, but it's also killing male fertility. And if we
Yeah.
don't take it seriously, by 2045, there could be zero male fertility,
And that's not
right?
an issue that people are like talking about right now. Like, you know,
Yeah, but your
it's
Tesla cars aren't going to avert that, right? Because the
exactly.
Tesla car is just a slick brochure to send you back to sleep,
But
right?
it's not just that though, Nick. It's like an onion. It's a layer of certain things, and it goes back to like you talked about the suburbs. The movement
Mm.
to the suburbs and the extension of leaving the city and going to the suburbs and creating the suburbs and creating this utopia of housing and whatever, blah blah blah. That actually help attribute to the situation, especially
Mm.
when it comes to like Lyme disease, especially when it comes to like removing certain predators from their area and allowing like field mice to be able to like manipulate, and those like being able to transmit diseases and bring disease from one area to the other area. It's everything. It's not just, oh well, you know, COVID happened because of the wet markets. No, it's not just that. It's the zoos as well. If you go into a bat cave, into a zoo, and you have bats that are sitting on top, all it takes is just like two seconds for one of them to shit or to piss or whatever, and it falls into somebody's mouth, and then boom, you have COVID. Like that, like that's what it is. It's this
Or one of
desire
the
to like,
40,000 other zoological diseases that threaten us from
yeah.
bats specifically, right?
Yeah,
So,
and it's the farming industry, it's the metal industry, it's every aspect of our society that we have to drastically shift. If me and you decide, you know what, we're gonna ride bikes for the rest of our life, we're gonna contribute to helping the system, that's not gonna do anything. It's the
well, I
entire
mean,
thing
we'd
and
get
how it's
fit.
structured. Oh yeah, we'll
I'd
be some
definitely lose a
we'll
lot
be
of
some
weight.
fit daddies. Yeah, same here.
Lose the dad bub for sure if I did that.
Hmm.
I would have to ride probably 20 miles to get to work, which is too much. I can't do that. and I would have to do that within 90 minutes
Yeah,
to
that's
to warrant replacing a car. And the other thing is, like, I don't know. I imagine to some extent, like, from what I've seen of pop culture, that there is a ring of truth to the subways as being a somewhat dangerous place um, to ride, right? Quote unquote.
mhm.
But it's not, when we were in Europe, my partner and I, we traveled exclusively on public transport, with very few exceptions of, like, maybe at night we got an Uber to the hotel because we couldn't see. But during the day, we would use the public transport options available to us in Europe. And in the is it the Shenzhen zone, where you don't need to show your passport to go from one country to another, like if you go from Germany to France or Switzerland or Holland or whatever, it's all the same. Once you've got a visa for the European Union, you're in. And so they've got these high speed railway where you can go from city to city. It may take 12 hours to get from, I don't know, Switzerland to Austria or something like that. But it's very comfortable, even in peak hour where people are, like, crammed in. It's still very comfortable, and they've got multiple services, and it's relatively affordable. It's pricey, but it's relatively affordable. We need to make public transport the goal. We
Mhm,
need to move away from cars entirely.
mhm.
And it's going to be difficult because this is where we're at. Like, the actual reality of the situation is that individuals have to give up the markers of individuality in a major way, and we
Yeah.
have to become communal. And that's the only way to resolve these issues. And we all have a role to play. And for most of us, that role isn't to be the starring quarterback or the starring wide receiver. The role is to take the opponent's run, to just block their run, right? That's, for most of us, that's what it is. We just have to do the grunt work, or maybe we're not even on the team, where we're reserve if they're 3 layers of injury deep or something.
Mhm.
We're not in the starting 11 or starting five. We're barely even on the roster, and we're certainly not the main character of the movie. But if we all continue to act as if we are the main character of the movie, and everything revolves around the me and the I, then the movie is going to end pretty soon. Like, you and I may be the last generation. I know there are babies being born every day and stuff like that, but you know what I mean. Like,
No, no,
we
I
may
know.
live to see the apocalypse.
Mhm.
Uh, well, I
Which
mean, live
is
to
this
see
is
the apocalypse is an interesting way to phrase it, but you know what I mean. Like, we
yeah,
may
no, no,
die
yeah.
with everybody else.
But it's a scary thought to look at, especially when you had okay, rewind to last year and you had Mike Pompeo who literally came out and said, "Oh, this is wonderful that the Arctics are like breaking apart. Look at these trade
Yeah,
routes that we could do.
we
We
can
could we
open
could
up
so many
north-south
trade
trade
routes. It's like,
routes
bro,
instead
like
of.
that's not good."
Yeah, but I mean, if you don't open them up, then the Ever Given could get stuck in the Suez Canal again, and that's $59 billion of global trade diminished. And
But then also too when you
try and
look at
buy a container, try and
when you
buy a
look
shipping container.
oh
You
no,
can't. They're not available because of things like that, right? Because
yeah.
we've got distribution chains that are breaking down all over the world, right?
Hmm.
So it's, and things like what happened in the Suez Canal, they highlight how fragile the system is. Now, certainly opening up a shipping lane in the Arctic, and I can guarantee the Russians are going to be pretty aggressive. America's dominance in that region isn't going to be what Mike Pompeo thinks it is, unless he's willing to have a thermonuclear war with Moscow,
Can't you can't let you
which
can't let Antarctica turn commie.
it's not even commie though, is it? Like, are people still seriously under the impression that Russia is communist today? I mean, come on, spare
Come on,
me that. Miss me
somebody literally sent
miss
me
me
a
with
link.
that shit.
Communism is bad.org.
I see you sent that to me.
I know.
So,
I was like, Nick has to see this.
well, but I mean, the points they made weren't necessarily wrong in terms of Hungary and the oppression of the Hungarian peoples within that system. But
But they
it's
missed
just
out the
that
key part of why Russia occupied Hungary. Who was occupying Hungary before Russia?
let me think about my history here. What's the timeline here? We're talking like the 30s and 40s
Mm-hmm.
in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Any big players at that time, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What happened
Oh,
with the
they
Holy Roman Empire? Did something happen there? Was there maybe a little Austrian-born painter who
mm-hmm.
thought
With a
he was Napoleon?
little funny mustache. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So maybe what was it? Leavenspa?
Yeah.
Living space? Yeah.
It's
Okay.
it's the same thing like when people ask like, oh, after a revolution, it's like Michael Parenti. He said it's like it's the hypocrisy that people ask like after a revolution happens or after or left wing organization or left wing government is put into play. The first thing people want to ask is what are the rights for the fascists? Like, look at the atrocities that you guys committed while trying to go into power.
What frustrates me is that if you make that argument, but you make it really complex, like add a really layer of complexity to it, right? And you show almost, in a sense, a dialectic approach to it. Right? And I don't mean what Luke Radowski of We Are Change calls the Hegelian dialectic, which he got from David Icke, which is what Alex Jones bangs on about this idea of problem, reaction, solution, which is like you've never opened a single page of Hegel in your life if that's what you think the dialectic is, right? The dialectic says there is no truth. There is no objective truth. There is only subjective alienation. And so, yeah, the right is committing atrocities, and you become alienated from those atrocities, and you move to the left until they're committing atrocities, and you become alienated to that, and then you swing back and forth until you approach a new consensus around moving away from both of them, and then that itself needs to be in dialectic with something else, and it's always moving, it's always fluid. It's like a paradox that creates this momentum of this engine of culture, and you can make a really complex argument of that, which is a thickly veiled apology for right-wing extremism. But that's not what we have. That's not what's happening in Georgia. It's a tantrum is what's happening in Georgia. It's, oh, we lost. All right. Well, next time you have to walk 500 miles, and then you have to walk 500 more just to wind up at the door of the
Yeah.
voting booth.
And it's not just that, but it's like, but people fail to see it's like, like I got this fucking headache just thinking about it. This is YouTuber, right? Who's like a sports YouTuber that I used to follow, but totally like during this whole Trump era of politics or whatever, totally stopped ignoring this dude. Totally ignored this dude because he was a fucking idiot, didn't know what he was talking about politics. See a video today, and he literally is talking about like it's not racist, this voting rights laws. What it is, it's making sure that no fraud is happening during the election, when nothing in there highlights anything to do with voter fraud. It makes it harder to vote more than anything.
Yeah. I mean, okay, but you design me a system where fraud doesn't take place at all. Like, can you show me a system that's been designed that has no fraud in it, or is completely impenetrable to the smartest criminal mastermind in your society? Like, is that the system we have right now? Like, what about Bezos? Is Bezos not in some way tilting the scale in his favor? We don't call it fraud. We don't even call it tax evasion. We call it smart.
Mm-hmm.
Very smart,
Good
right?
business practice.
Yeah. But I meant in the way that what Trump talked about. It's
No,
not
yeah,
tax evasion, it's smart, right? Whatever. Um, and I know, like, the threat of dick pics between Trump and Bezos, and like who's going to release whose dodgy, whatever.
yeah.
I'm sure
That's
if
more
that
funny.
Russian P tape exists, Bezos has a copy of it, right?
Oh, definitely is on one
Um,
of his servers.
but even in the extent of like the fact that Bezos owns the Washington Post, and people aren't upset by that because I think the Majority Report played a clip of someone saying the Washington Post is like early last week, maybe Tuesday last week, and they're playing a clip of some commentator, Stuart, someone, some
Giovanni.
yeah, some smarmy British guy saying, well, the Washington Post is the most left-wing commie extremist newspaper out there. And it's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking? Have you heard of, like, come on. That's a failed imagination if you think that the Washington Post is like left-wing at all. But in any event, I don't think that you can have a situation where society is going to be, uh, in good hands when you have that kind of consolidation of power across multiple industries. Like, the Washington Post should be exposing every bottle of piss that is filled on an Amazon shift by an Amazon worker, every bag of poop that is filled by a
In the
delivery
truck.
driver with an
Mhm.
Amazon uniform on, right? We don't see that UPS doesn't have these issues, right? FedEx doesn't have these issues. Maybe they do, but they're not publicized in the same way as Amazon's are.
Mhm. But when
And
you
like
look, but when you look,
Amazon using the photo from the guy from Dude Perfect in
oh
like the
god,
fake
that's hilarious.
profile that was like husband, father, happy Amazon worker. And it was like, I think Body Politic on Instagram did a really good job
Hmm.
of like doing a little GIF video or GIF video showing that if you Google Dude Perfect, you see first result, right?
Yeah,
First result. So
yeah.
it's like, what's happened here, right?
But it's it's
And
it's when you look at those sectors that you just highlighted with Amazon, when it comes to
mm,
like delivery drivers, UPS drivers and FedEx drivers make double, if not triple, what Amazon delivery drivers get paid.
mhm.
Just like in Bessemer, Alabama, union factory workers in that area get paid on average
What
22 to $24 an hour compared to the Amazon
what
factory
happened?
workers getting paid 15 $16 an hour in that same area. And let's not say that Amazon came up out of nowhere and decided to start paying factory workers $15 an hour. No, that was Bernard Sanders that got that done.
What happened with the do we know the results of that?
Oh, I'm still waiting on it. Like I didn't hear anything about it.
One day ago. When will we know who won? AL dot.
Gotta count the votes, brother.
The vote ended on Monday. We still don't have a vote.
They said,
Observers say the count will likely be next week.
yeah, Labor Secretary will
So,
see the results in next week.
well, look, I think that if hopefully that is just a formality now. Hopefully that got through. They needed a portionality, so I think they needed 50% of people who turned up to voting for it, not 50% of the employees,
Mm-hmm.
which increases the odds in the favor of the union being
Mm-hmm.
organized. And it's a step. It's not enough, but it's a step. I think you know we're a long way from a general strike. A long, long way from a general strike. And I think there's too many situations, and definitely a part of that is just the sort of inbuilt divisions among the laboring class that have been exploited for centuries, right? If not millennia, but in the case of the American context, for centuries, right? The divisions between Hispanic, white, black, and all the other races of people within the working class is what allows the both the Democratic and Republican parties to avoid any kind of systematic change in terms of the lives of ordinary people in America. And if you exclude a segment of the population from your organizing efforts, then they have no incentive to help you win your organizing efforts. And if anything, they're going to be less likely to give up the pittance that they get. So when you had strikes in the early part of the 20th century, the fact that African American employees were not going to benefit from it, even if it got up, meant that the employer could rely on their labor to maintain production.
Yeah.
So it was never going to win. And that's the root cause. And again, it just gets back to that whole thing of like, well, at least I'm better than them. So yeah, my life is shit, but at least I'm better than them. And then that when you have the cognitive dissonance of the fact that you're not, that we are all human, regardless of what we look like on the outside.
Yep.
If you think about, I know in this situation, it's like we've been on Zoom for a year and we've been on these YouTube things, and so we're so used to looking at ourselves that we've never looked at ourselves more, and we've never looked worse. But if you move away from screens for a while, that's not my joke, by the way. I think that might be Judy Gold, one of the Majority Report contributors. Anyway, she has a book, I think, called Yes, I Can Say That. I think that's her book about
Oh wait, is
cancel
that like
culture.
she's a comedian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's her joke. I mean, I borrow jokes from whoever. I'm a plagiarist in that sense.
Shout out to the
whatever.
Majority Report crew.
Shout out, definitely. And we miss Michael every day, obviously. But within the context of what I'm sort of saying here is that it's important that with these growing existential fears, right? If you think about what would it take if we had every single leader, if we had a summit and every single leader attended, and they all took a serious pill for a minute, right? And just for 48 hours, they had to be deadly serious. They couldn't obfuscate into fantasies about this or that issue. And I know we're about to wrap up, and I'm opening a can of worms here. We both need to go. We've both got hard outs. But the bigger point that I'm trying to make is that the actual work is very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. And the chance of success is very low. So it's easy then to just say, well, let's just have a press conference and say we're going to explode chalk dust and that will work. Or let's say we're going to put some mirrors somewhere, some satellite mirrors to reflect some of the sun's rays. And, I one of the people on YouTube that I really, really like, and I've only discovered recently, is Justin, who has a channel called Do Not Eat. And I love this. He plays this game called City Skylines. I think he also plays Transport Fever, but I don't know that. So I only watch the City Skylines stuff. But he's got this city of Franklin, which is loosely based on New York, right? Or loosely based on Philadelphia. Or a combination.
Isn't that's the game that you just sent me, right?
Yeah. So it's loosely based on kind of like the development of New York, but also like some of the architectures based on the development of Philadelphia, and it's all sorts of different things. But it's culturally they're the same, right? Both major East Coast settlements, if you want.
It's a better version of Sims.
Sorry, yeah. Well, I mean, it depends. It depends what your personal preferences are. But one of the things that he's got all sorts of different things, like power, politics, and city planning as one of his series. And he talks about like organized labor and stuff like that. But he has this point about the difference between actual machinery and magic. and it's AM versus FM, and F is obviously a 4-letter word with ing at the end, right? So,
hold on, 2 seconds.
and
Sorry, my bell is ringing. Hold on.
well, I will continue to vamp. So, City Skylines is an amazing game where I find it really fascinating and meditative as well, in the sense that you can kind of get this kind of bird's eye view. And as a sociologist, one of the things I talk about is movement predicts behavior. And the biggest challenge, I think, for most players within City Skylines is the idea of traffic management. And so
Sorry, Nick, I left you
understanding
by yourself. Sorry.
that's all right. I was just explaining like traffic management within the game is the biggest issue that players encounter. But from a sociological perspective, that's really interesting because movement predicts behavior. And like individuals are impossible to predict. Human individuals are very unpredictable. Even on a sports court, like the Knicks want to be super predictable for each other, but in order to win, you need some level of spontaneity to break that predictability in order to disguise the ball so the opposition doesn't intercept. So individuals are very hard to predict, groups are predictable, and movement predicts behavior. So if you're looking at traffic as both a literal thing, like if you get in a helicopter above New York and watch the traffic, you'll get a sense of like what the behaviors of New Yorkers are, right? If you watch the traffic. But then if we apply that as a metaphor to the internet and you were able to sort of get real time, like if we had traffic reports on the internet and the same reports on the freeways and highways and stuff, I think that I think we need that role in society, people who are just reporting on internet traffic and showing us where things are clustering and where people go. Like, it's not just enough to say everyone's going to Amazon.com and the traffic to Amazon.com is at this level or whatever. I don't know what this role would look like, but I think it's needed because it helps us predict behavior. And right now, the people who have it, Zuckerberg, Dorsey, Bezos, etc., it's all the wrong people who have access to this data, and it needs to be transparent. But I want to see, what do people do after they finish shopping at Amazon? You can't spend 24 hours of a day on Amazon, and no one wants to spend their time. So when do they go to YouTube? And what do they do after they go to YouTube? Do they go to Instagram? Do they log off? What happens? And where are all the pathways and intercepts, and how is this infrastructure, like, where are the turnoffs, right? And what turnoffs are not working, and turnpikes and things of that nature. But in this particular game, I was trying to make a point that Justin brought up about AM versus FM and this is in a video about the Hyperloop, right? When Elon Musk first announced the Hyperloop. But the broader point that Justin is making in this video is that when it comes to AM, when it comes to actual machinery, when it comes to actually producing results in the real world, the inertia and everything else that goes into old school methods and developed methods that go all the way back to like the guilds of the Middle Ages and stuff is very, very different. And it's very easy to sell someone on the FM ideas like the Hyperloop. Like, oh, well, we can solve traffic by just building more and more tunnels because you can build infinite number of tunnels. But the reality is what it takes, and Justin does a really good job of showing this, what it takes to build a tunnel and then using that effort and energy for a private vehicle that can fit one up to maybe 5 people versus if you use that same energy and effort to build a high-speed rail system that could service up to 3, 4, 500 people, and you would only need one tunnel. You wouldn't need multiple tunnels, right? One tunnel each direction, or maybe 2 tunnels each direction to increase flow. And when you think about where those tunnels need to be placed and how they need to be placed within the city and what's beneath a building, right? People, you think about the biggest, like One Trade Center in New York, right? Is that currently the biggest building in New York, something like that? How many levels underground do you think that goes?
I thought about that.
Right, it's a lot though, because it's proportional to the size. Like
Yeah.
the hole that they would have had to have dug. Like if you go to the memorial, the World Trade Center memorial, right, where the buildings used to be,
See the hole.
and it's
Yeah.
just those two big pits, right? Those
Mhm.
pits is because you needed the foundations to be that deep and probably even deeper than that. So how far down do you have to dig to build your Hyperloop tunnels to service New York traffic? It's going to be a long way down, which is going to be a huge cost. So it's impossible. But you can sell the idea because, you know, Hitchcock and Spielberg and Kubrick and all the rest of us have convinced us that science fiction becomes reality. And eventually these ideas will go from being FM to AM. But politically, it's too easy, right? It's too easy to sell these ideas as policy when they're not achievable. So if our politicians met at a summit and took a serious pill for 48 hours and actually looked at what they had to do to address these systemic existential issues like climate crisis and pollution of other sorts, you know, I think that they may just give up and say it's too hard. It's too hard for every single nation on earth to cooperate, at least under a capitalist system. And I think that's where our argument comes in. It's like
Yep.
we need to move away from a system of competition to a system of cooperation.
Because when you have a system that's just driven on for profit, and maximizing that profit and exploitation, the earth has just so many finite resources you can mine. At some point, we are going to run out of stuff to take from stuff. Like we're gonna run out of that, you know, and then is it the conversation of like, all right, cool. So then the rich elite are gonna be able to jump on a spaceship and go to Mars or go someplace else and populate some other planet, and then the human race that lives on that planet would destroy that planet. And it's we
Okay,
just
so
have to be eradicated.
here's the thing I don't understand, right? Like, why do the rich want to go to Mars? I know it costs a lot to get there, so it's exclusive and there's a status to it and everything. But like Mars is vastly uninhabitable compared to Earth.
Yeah,
Like
it's
impossibly uninhabitable compared to Earth, right?
it's what they call, how can I say it? It's like it was a theory that came out that was like Mars was actually Earth and it was destroyed because of climate change, and we got in rocket ships and came to Earth and repopulated the Earth, and we destroyed Earth, and we could want to go back
So
to
yeah,
Mars because
that's some Atlantean mythos, right? Like Atlantis was actually Mars or something like that. I mean, it's possible. It's possible that Mars was once habitable, but I mean, you know, what we know for certain is that right now there are not human civilizations living on Mars.
oh yeah.
And I don't see why the elite think that going there is going to be beneficial to their needs and desires of like luxury living. I mean, if they were serious about that, why shipping all of us there as grunts? Like that's what I don't get about the whole Mars thing. Why isn't it like busloads of people in tuna can, sardine packed in little vehicles that are really likely to explode upon the wall if you're going to get there? But those who do have like maybe that's what's coming. Maybe they're just sending it's a ruse so that we think that the elites are going, but actually the prison wardens are going to set up the carceral system of
Exactly.
instead of Siberia, Mars. That's what's coming.
There's no labor laws up there, so they could just like send people up and just exploit them on different planets.
Well, yeah, and then they can say we've solved slavery.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
slavery
yeah.
left on Earth.
Exactly. We eradicated all slavery from Earth.
From Earth. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what's
But
coming.
bro,
What
I
a
think
note to end on, hey?
yeah, I know, right? I know, right? What a great note to end off, slavery in space. That'd be a great
Fuck Elon
sci-fi
Musk.
movie. That's the fucking what's that John Travolta and his horribles fucking movie that was about.
Battlestar
Oh man,
Galactica?
as a child, I'm not gonna lie. As a child, I really enjoyed that movie as a child. But when I got older and realized what it was about,
Isn't that Is that
It's
Scientology?
yeah, it's L. Ron Hubbard's like one
Okay,
of his
yeah.
books.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
I know it
yeah,
was a TV show. I know that it was
yeah.
they
They
rebooted
made it
it a
into a
few
TV
different
show.
times, but
Hmm.
it was like the 60s or something
Mm.
was originally and it was quite popular. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, look, I mean, John Travolta's a different cat. I'm not going to pick on him. I want to leave John Travolta out of
we'll
the
save that
mix.
for another
Want to
day
pick
when
on
we do.
Scientologists, pick on Tom Cruise.
There you go.
Uh, but look, I think we'll end it on the idea of Mars becoming a slave colony, and that's something else we can fight against when the time comes.
Definitely, definitely. My brother Nick, as always, it's always a pleasure, bro. And salute, comrade. We will be back on next week. Everyone in the
That's
chat.
it.
I may do something during the week. I don't know. I'll be starting a new job soon, but we'll figure it out. Love you, my guy. And like
Love
always,
you too.
peace, love, sports, wrestling. And like Michael Brook always said, be harsh and critical towards systems, but be empathetic and compassionate
And
towards
kind
people.
to individuals. That's it.
Hmm. Love
See
you, my
ya.
guy.